Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Icon for Hire, called You Can't Kill Us. So this will probably be a bit of a weird review, and not just because I've got a bit of a history with this band, but also because, well, hindsight's one of those things that can shift one's opinion on an act pretty dramatically. And as much as I don't really want to or like to admit it, Icon for Hire often falls into that camp for me, most because they can be a difficult band to categorize, and I've had mixed opinions upon them for their entire career. Many people thought that when they signed to Tooth and Nail, a Christian label, that they'd fall into that disreputable subgenre badly produced crap, but Icon for Hire actually rose a fair bit above a lot of their contemporaries to make some pretty solid alternative rock and metal, with a knack for solid writing, good hooks, and the tremendous talents of frontwoman Ario. They infused a lot more pop and hip-hop elements into their self-titled sophomore album, basically to satirize a lot of them, and I liked that record so much that it ended up on my top 25 albums of 2013. Now, in retrospect, I'm not all that certain now that I could justify it on that list, mostly because the production that the label gave them was pretty flat. Their producer Mike Green had worked with Pierce the Veil and Paramore, which has been a comparison that's been made with Icon for Hire their entire careers, and not exactly a promising one, especially for Paramore, but it did not help that self-titled album, and it actually has aged pretty poorly. And then somehow it all got worse. Everything went to shit. They ran into serious conflicts with their label, probably because they've always kept Christian subject matter at arm's length, which is probably smart for any sort of artistic development. Then they went independent, they dropped an EP back in 2015, that got some pretty polarized reactions for Now You Know, which railed very hard against music industry sexism. And yeah, I appreciate the bluntness of that message and the deeper attempts at much of the subtext there, but the delivery of that message just did not work at all. It wasn't a good song. Ariel's less melodic rap delivery, the grating synths, the flat production, it did no service to an otherwise important message. And when you hear how they funded their newest album through Kickstarter, raising over $100,000 to get Mike Green back and pull it all together, look, still deep down, I like this group, and they've written some strong songs and some smart hooks, and I really want to like this, especially if they're doing this all in their own direction. So, can You Can't Kill Us really diminish deliver here? Honestly, going through this album, it was the sort of listen that connected to me in a way that I absolutely dread happening. The album that makes me think that I might have given this band entirely too much credit in the first place. I'll admit I probably overrated their self-titled album a bit. I was probably a little bit more enamored than I should have been with the thematic conceit, if I'm being honest. But that's definitely not the case of what's going to happen here. That doesn't exactly make it precisely bad, but the drop-off in quality is steep enough to raise some very serious questions about Icon for Hire, and answers I guarantee won't satisfy anyone, including myself. So okay, what went wrong here? Well, the place we need to start is the lyrics and themes, which are laser focused on Icon for Hire establishing its independence and asking the larger question of what the hell they do now. Now, in principle, this could make for fascinating content. A band caught in serious strife with a predominantly Christian label, they could really delve into the deeper implications and even borderline hypocrisy that could have led to their exit, and the deeply uncertain state that they're in right now. That's a compelling story. I'd hear that. And hell, Icon for Hire do take a couple of steps in that direction, including the very real question right at the gate on Supposed to Be, that if their angst and artistic creativity could survive that next step, or if their audience would follow along if they managed to get over their pain. Now, that was a theme that Aesop Rock was exploring on the Impossible Kid just this year, and there's real thematic punch to it. But the unfortunate problem that arises is that while Aesop Rock hit that thematic point through expanded subtext in his storytelling, delving into the deep-seated and complicated roots of his depression and isolation, Icon for Hire rely on the actual text almost entirely, which would be fine if the stories actually went into more detail, but there's no way around how garden variety and basic a lot of the metaphors and lyrics really are on this album, and I honestly can't see their label taking much of an issue with any of this, even a nominally Christian one if they wanted to push this album. Sure, the insecurity and instability might run contrary to typical evangelical music, but that can make for compelling art regardless, and even with that, Icon for Hire are not particularly profane or even descriptive in their internal crises to flip off any alarm bells here. Now, at its most descriptive, the manic depression of Happy Hurts or the embracing and acceptance of inner pain to write music on Get Well Too, that might be kind kind of controversial, but I doubt it, considering how much of the rest of this record plays to this broad, desperate struggle for survival where the stakes don't really seem all that well defined. Of course, the big exception to that is the song about cutting called Under the Knife, which talks about how elements of emo community have embraced self-harm in order to get cred, and it said how you should channel your pain and angst into something else, like Ariel did with her music. And yeah, it's a good message to be sure, but the writing, like all of it on this album, is so painfully on the nose and direct that it doesn't really stick for me in the same way, especially compared to their last album. The smarter subtext that I really liked about that self-titled album seems to be completely gone, regressing back to the scripted era of their writing, maybe even lower, because between the repeated words and stuttered syllables to fill up space, I feel like we're getting the drafts of these songs that really could have used a lot of tighter refinement, and that lack of subtlety unfortunately slips everywhere, and that includes Ariel herself. The rap, shout, singing that she does, I'm not sure if it's an issue with the vocal production, which doesn't really place her into the mix so much as on top of it, or how she's amped up her delivery to the point where every single word that she spits or sings seems to be the most important ever and emphasized as such, and it can really come across as kind of campy, obnoxious, or overdone, especially when she dips into that baby voice or piles on the overdubs. It doesn't nearly work as well as it has in the past for me. Part of that is that her choice of vocal tone carries a lot less melody, but I'm a little bit baffled why she's even bothering with the rapping here. Wasn't the whole point of all the rapping on the self-titled album for self-aware mocking of that modern pop formula? Here it's all played straight, and the clash of styles really does not flatter her as a vocalist. And you know what? I'd say a lot of that about the instrumentation and production too. This might have been me giving the self-titled album entirely too much credit back in 2013, because it's not like the sound has evolved or shifted all that much at all beyond getting louder and heavier, but again, I was under the impression that all those pop and hip-hop touches were stylistic for the point of satire, and yet here, with none of that, that excuse doesn't fly at all. Hell, maybe it never did, but it also means the flaws here are a lot more glaring for me. For one, nearly every single synth feels imported from 2013 at best, crammed to the brim with entirely too much grinding texture and squealing siren-like tone, and combined with a very blocky percussion right at the front of the mix, makes for an overstuffed and blaring listen that doesn't have the dynamics or the depth to really hold together. Yes, I do like that the electric guitars finally pick up some more grind and weight, if not a lot of melody. We'll come back to this. But take Demons, for example. The chintzy synth melody opening up that song doesn't match at all with the tempo or the groove of that main guitar riff when that comes in. One of the few grooves this album actually has. Or how Ariel's vocals translate to this ugly, buzzing synth tone after the hook on Here We Are. Yeah, there's melody, which unfortunately doesn't show up enough beyond the overdubbed vocals, which does a disservice to all these hooks, but that melody that there is here is a pretty grating one. It's slightly better on the hook of Pulse, which gets rid of that gummy synth that runs through the verses in a percussion line half ripped from We Will Rock You by Queen, and then picks up a decent crescendo by pulling back and letting the groove accelerate all on its own in the percussion and guitars. And then you get a similar case for Too Loud, which lets the deeper synths and the stuttering percussion build a little bit more of a stomping groove off the guitar. Although, about a song where they're getting too loud, I'm a little bit baffled why they felt the need to muffle Ariel's vocals on the hook, or take the heavier grind of Get Well Too, which sadly isn't nearly as catchy as the original. And that's not counting the flat tap of the beat on the Magic with too much flattened buzz and vocal filters, or the ugly gurgling chunks of You Were Wrong that throw in these odd tinkling effects that really aren't remotely needed. It's probably the worst song here. But songs like Supposed to Be, Happy Hurts, and the title track, they work because despite being over-mixed, they've got a little bit more atmosphere. They actually modulate properly. Hell, War and Under the Knife are still flatter than I would prefer with the awkwardly mixed vocals and percussion and the painfully cheap production all around, but at least they carry a little bit more melody thanks to the piano. I will remember those songs a little bit more. But look, at the end of the day, look, I really wanted to go easy on Icon for Hire. I really did love their sophomore album, or at least I think I did, and their debut is still pretty damn good, but this? The production's either cheap, overdone, or sloppy. The melodic hooks are very hit and miss, and the overdone vocals only highlight writing that feels increasingly shallow and empty for me. Now, there are some good lyrical ideas here in principle, and the hooks that do work, they've got some stomping presence that I sincerely hope will stick on me with the long term. And look, Ariel is still a powerful and pretty talented frontwoman, but I can't overlook the serious flaws here either, and really how none of these songs measure up to the original Get Well. or pop culture, or counting on hearts. For me, this is an extremely light 6 out of 10, and that's being generous. I appreciate how hard it is to go independent, do it on your own, and I can appreciate that making the comeback album full of anthems. I definitely get the desire to do that, but the transition only gave us a decent record at best. And I sincerely hope that Icon for Hire are ready to start pushing the gauntlet again, because I like a lot of what they're doing, but they could be doing it better. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll right here, so if you guys see this review, and I understand that some of you guys are hardcore Icon for Hire fans, I understand this might piss you off a little bit, but hey, there's your chance to tell me how wrong I am. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to request more albums, I got my link to my Patreon right here. 3 times a week, you guys can vote on what albums are coming up on the schedule next, and on Saturdays, you get the opportunity to add albums if you're on the higher Patreon level. So far, things are going really well with it. I'd like to see more of you guys get involved. It's been a lot of fun thus far. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.